Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the London Walking and Cycling Conference. This is our 9th year of this conference, but our first time online. So I hope you're going to be a forgiving audience if the technology defeats us at some point. This event will be 1 hour long, and it has been organised by the City Corporation of London and Hackney Council in association with Steer. So just to introduce myself, I'm Julie Bauman and I will be your chair for the day. My background is as a transport planner. I've been working in the capital now for about 30 years on sustainable traffic and transport schemes. Having previously worked at a borough and also through my work at Steer, I am well aware of the challenges we face in terms of promoting mode shift towards walking and cycling. But I have to say I've been very heartened across my working career to see the strides that we've made towards promoting cycling and walking as a key mode. I also appreciate these kinds of events where we can share our experiences and be inspired by others to achieve those challenges. So today's webinar is on travelling to school during the pandemic. I think we've all been faced with that challenge of trying to work out how to get our children safely back to school after 6 months away. Actions have included supporting social distancing and safer routes to school projects, which have delivered school streets, footway widening, and staggering start and finishing times. And yet data we've received from the RAC shows that between 8 and 9 a.m, traffic is up 55% compared to a similar period in August, and is probably at the same level as it was in January before this pandemic. At the same time, the ONS has provided us with data which suggests that only 20% of the workforce is back to work. So we clearly have got a challenge ahead of us in avoiding a car-based return to work. In London, lots of projects have been ongoing, and I'm sure there are people in the audience who have been supporting these. We've got 420 school street projects which have been funded through TfL, 270 of which are now on streets, and more than 40 of these are in Hackney, which we will hear about later. In preparation for the September start, some 3,200 schools have been supported to encourage active travel and also consider staggering start and finish times. TfL have supported the provision of more than 230,000 buses. No, 230 buses, I beg your pardon. And they've extended the free school, the Zipcard scheme to enable free travel to spring next year. Although we all know at the moment that that's under attack. But I guess these statistics are all really useful, but as a mum, I clearly remember the first day I sent my son off to school to walk by himself and the fear in my heart. Overlaying the current pandemic clearly means that there are a lot of worried parents out there. So I'm hoping today's speakers will be able to help share their experience in allaying those fears and supporting walking and cycling to school. Our speakers today are Steve Edwards from Living Streets, who will talk to us about walking to school during the pandemic. Phil Dobson from Upcycle, who will talk to us about cycling to school and its barriers, especially from children from an ethnic minority background. And then Dominic Humbert from Hackney Council will talk to us about introducing school streets and avoiding a car-led recovery. So I've just got a few housekeeping points. First of all, as I said, the event will be an hour long. We've got 3 presentations, each approximately 10 minutes, and then we've got 10 to 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A session with the panel. Right, to submit questions, you are going to need to load up onto the Slido platform. To do this, you'll need to log into your internet browser and insert sli.do. So that's sli.do.com. And then enter the event code, which is #LWCC. From there, you can actually upload your questions and upvote on questions that you'd particularly like to hear a response to. We'd ask that if you could possibly put in your name as well as your question and where your organisation, that would be really helpful in terms of identifying the questions. I'll be then reading the questions to the panel and asking them to provide a response. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. He is Steve Edwards from Living Streets. He is going to give us a presentation on walking to school during the pandemic.
Thank you very much. And before I kick off my presentation, I'd really like to thank Steer, Hackney and the City of London for putting on this conference today and over the coming weeks. The London Walking and Cycling Conference is a fantastic event, and it's great that despite the strange conditions we find ourselves in, we're still able to meet at this great conference. For those of you that don't know Living Streets, Living Streets is the charity for everyday walking. We want more people to walk their everyday journeys and to create a better walking environment. And we launched our new 5-year strategy only last week. And our focus here is really on ensuring more people choose walking. The health inequalities that are at the heart of our society and how better walking environments can address these are very much at the heart of this new strategy. It's on our website, so please do go onto the website and take a look. A great place to start addressing some of these issues around getting more people walking and around better walking environments is the journey to school. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, both in terms of some of the successful strategies that we've adopted at Living Streets to get more children walking to school, and some of the infrastructure that can sit alongside that to really add value to the interventions that we encourage, but also to talk about some of the unique challenges posed by the pandemic we find ourselves in and how we've seen schools reacting to that and how we've helped them to respond. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to start off with a little bit of context on why the school run is so important. First of all, quite a staggering statistic, which aligns with some of the figures we were just hearing about the number of cars on our roads now compared to earlier on in the year. The school run is responsible for 1 in 4 cars in the morning peak, according to the stats we've developed, which is quite staggering when you think that in England, 20% of people live within a mile of their primary school and don't walk at the moment. So there's a really concerning number of vehicles travelling just to and from school for various reasons. And data released recently by the UK government in their annual National Travel Survey shows that fewer children are walking to school. The numbers fell back before the pandemic from 51% to 47%. And on top of that, if you look at the London specific picture, there are big variations between inner London and outer London, with walking to school rates being far lower in outer London than they are in inner. So that's a concerning picture to start with. But when you combine that with the fact that we know children aren't achieving the right levels of physical activity and that increasing numbers of children are leaving primary school overweight and obese, it really does show that the transport choices we make for this very simple journey to school have big health impacts, but also have big environmental impacts as well. 28% of our domestic carbon emissions come from transport, and transport also has a major impact on air quality as well. So the school run is something that is vital to address if we're going to improve our environment and if we're going to improve our health. And at the moment, quite simply, the current school run situation isn't helping our children to grow up healthily. On to the next slide, please. So as you'd expect from a walking charity, we think the solution lies in encouraging more children to walk to school. Walking to school is free, it's easy, it's accessible, and we can use our streets to travel short distances very easily, whether on foot or in a wheelchair or using mobility aid. Walking has tremendous benefits for our physical and our mental health, which is a particularly key theme at the moment, given some of the physical and mental health problems we've seen arise during the kind of COVID-19 pandemic. If you want a summary of these major health benefits of walking, we produced a paper setting them out quite succinctly earlier on this year. So do go onto our website and have a look at that, which we published in February. So through our WOW challenge, which I'll talk about in a minute, we're witnessing significant change across the UK, and the programmes that we're delivering add much benefit to schools by getting more children and their parents and their carers walking to school. But in our view, in conjunction with school streets, low traffic neighbourhoods, lower speed limits, all of this can have a profound and long-lasting positive impact on on children's health and on children's well-being. And that's what I want to talk about today, that combination of behaviour change programmes and infrastructure change working seamlessly together to get more families walking to school. So on to the next slide, please. So first of all, I want to talk about the behavioural change aspect of this, and just describe some of the work that we're doing at Living Streets. We run a programme called WOW, and this is our year-round Walk to School challenge. And through WOW, we work with over 2,000 primary schools across the country to encourage more children to walk to school. WOW is a very simple scheme. It's a badge reward scheme enjoyed by pupils, parents, carers and teachers alike. Children log their journey either on a wall chart or on our interactive online travel tracker at the start of the school day. And if you undertake a certain number of journeys per month by active travel, then you get a badge. And the results speak for themselves. On average, WOW schools see a 23% increase in children walking to school, and also a 30% reduction in cars driving up to the school gates. And I'd like to kind of do a shout out for Hackney, really. Hackney has been an exemplar of what can be achieved through WOW, and they've been running WOW in their primary schools for many years. So I'd like to thank the team for all of the support they've given us over the years. On to the next slide, please. Aside from the WOW challenge that runs throughout the year, every year we really want to celebrate the Walk to School through Walk to School Week. Now, Walk to School Week normally takes place during May, which is National Walking Month. But for obvious reasons, this year it wasn't possible to hold Walk to School Week. So instead we held it in October, which is also International Walk to School Month. And we saw thousands and thousands of children across the UK travelling actively to school, raising awareness of the benefits of walking. And we use this as an opportunity to get those children engaging both with their communities, but also with local MPs, local councillors and other decision makers, just to really highlight the benefits of the walk to school. And we were particularly delighted to do a walk with the Minister of State for Transport and the Mayor here in Hackney to really highlight the benefits both of WOW and of school streets, which I'll come on to shortly. So on to the next slide, please. I do really need to go back to COVID-19 though, and the big challenges this creates. Even before the pandemic hit, there were big challenges with the space for walking around the school gates and the interaction between children, parents travelling actively to school and the number of vehicles at the school gates. And COVID-19 has exacerbated the problem. And it's very, very clear from all the statistics we're hearing every day that things aren't going to change at any point soon. So parents are rightly concerned about the lack of space for social distancing around the school gates. And there are additional complications given bubbles for different classes and different year groups, and the concern that some still have about public transport. For us, this highlights the need for action and the need for other changes too. And it's vital, as we've heard before, that parents don't respond by jumping into their cars for school transport. this could exacerbate some of the challenges around COVID. And we all know, for example, how living with poor air quality can really further complicate some of those COVID symptoms. So in addition to the behavioural change schemes that many schools are undertaking, we think it's time that we really need to think about creating additional space around schools to ensure the school walk is safe from a COVID secure perspective, but also that many of the other benefits of that increased space for air quality, for road safety, for physical activity can also be realised. And as we discussed at the beginning of this event, London has responded fantastically, and there are a number of school street schemes already on board. And I want to come on to those next. Next slide, please. I know Dominique is going to talk to us a little bit more about this shortly, but for us, school streets is a key part of the solution to creating more space around school gates. So this is very simply, as many of you will know, closing streets outside the schools to traffic at core pickup and drop-off times. And Hackney has really been an exemplar of what can be done in this, and have a great school streets toolkit, which I'm sure we'll hear more. The Living Streets, we also have a school streets toolkit, but ours is more directed at local communities to give them the tools that they need to argue to their local authorities and to their councillors that they should be doing more to take action in this space. School streets are critical, but school streets work even better if they sit alongside other interventions. And for us, this is where low traffic neighbourhoods come in. If a school street is situated within a low traffic neighbourhood, it really adds value to the work that school street can do. And there are many other interventions which local authorities across London are moving forward with at the moment that can really help to improve that school walk. 20-mile-per-hour zones, improving crossing facilities, looking at how pavements can be widened. All of these things make that school walk much, much better quality, much safer and much cleaner for children. Now, you would have all noticed there's been a lot of noise around these proposals at the moment, but survey data does show that there is a silent majority in favour of change. And I think one of the things that we all need to think about, and I'm sure we'll come on to this in the discussion later on, is how we can work hard together to ensure that those voices in the community that may get drowned out in all the clamour from some of the more negative groups can really make their voice heard, and be more innovative in the consultation and engagement we can undertake to ensure they can be heard. So on to the next slide, please. So this is my final slide, and just to finish off, optimizing the school run for us as a low traffic strategy is about turning that school run into a school walk. It's about investing in street infrastructure, such as school streets and low traffic neighbourhoods. And it's about investing in behaviour change schemes like WOW, which can embed change and kind of make walking to school a real choice. I need to add, though, that with COVID infection rates increasing, we also need to continue to ensure that families are able to make healthy choices with their walk to school when they're walking, but also with increasing numbers of families self-isolating over the coming weeks. We need to ensure that those good exercise habits, those healthy habits, can be preserved for the children who are kind of stuck at home for 2 weeks. And we've developed some resources on our website which can help children to get that exercise in, some challenges that you can do inside as well as outside to really highlight the benefits of physical activity. So our call to action is that we all need to work together to ensure that children everywhere can benefit from the simple act of walking. There's a number of local authorities already doing some great work. And if we all work together, we can just kind of boost that further and make sure our children can enjoy healthy, happy lives for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Sorry, Steve, for that really really interesting talk. I was particularly struck by the fact that about the healthy aspects and the opportunity that walking presents in terms of meeting your daily activity, which a lot of children will have found that those activities outside of school that they used to attend will also have been closed down during COVID. So the walk to school is going to be their activity for the day. I've just been asked, we've been asked a question about whether or not it's recorded. It is, and there will be an opportunity to be able to replay that. So I mentioned that again. I'd also just like to remind you about if you want to upload a question to Stephen or any of our other speakers, then you've got the opportunity to do through the Slido link showed on your screen now. So I'm now going to introduce our next speaker, who's Phil Dobson, who's the co-founder of Upcycle, and he's going to be talking to us about the project that he's set up, but also the barriers that young people face in terms of trying to cycle to school, particularly with those with an ethnic minority background. Over to you, Phil.
Yep, thank you very much, Julie, and thanks to LWCC for giving me the opportunity to talk today. So, yeah, as mentioned, my name's Phil and I'm the founder of an organisation called Upcycle. Today I want to talk about why I actually started Upcycle and some of the barriers that young people from ethnic minority groups face when it comes to cycling to school in London. Let's get the next slide, please. So basically I started Upcycle back in June. In response to the global Black Lives Matter movement and the adverse effect that COVID-19 was having on London's BAME community, which really highlighted just how much inequality is ingrained in today's society. Despite it being unsafe, many young Black people and Asian and minority ethnic people had to use public transport to travel throughout the pandemic, which increased the risk of infection and then passing it on to parents or grandparents who may be at high risk. So many others are also facing extreme financial difficulty and simply couldn't afford it. So initially the aim of Upcycle was to get kids off public transport and onto bikes by fixing as many unused and second-hand bikes as possible and then donating them to charities that specialise in working with young people from ethnic minority groups. So they had a safe and free way to travel around the city during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So basically to start with, I was just using money from a crowdfunding campaign to buy second-hand bikes and store them in my flat and then just give them a clean and a service and fix them up myself. But luckily, not long after I started, I got an interview on 5 Live where I managed to talk about the project, and soon bikes were being donated by members of the public, bike shops, train companies, and also Lambeth Council. So that was great. And soon enough, it didn't take long for me to start running out of space in the flat, and I had to start renting a space over in Brixton where I could store and fix the bikes. So yeah, basically we've managed to already hand over bikes to a charity called Voyage Youth in Hackney. They're doing some great work with school leavers, basically getting them ready for further education or work. So that picture on the bottom right there, that's Isaac receiving his bike. He was absolutely buzzing about it, as you can see. He did some really great work over the summer working on volunteer projects. So the bike was kind of a reward for what he'd been doing. And then we've also helped out Carney's community over in Battersea. So they run their own bike workshop. We've given them a few bikes for them to work on themselves. And then next week, hopefully, we'll be handing some bikes over to secondary school age kids at the Grove Adventure Playground just in Lambeth. So when I started sort of handing the bikes over and speaking to the leaders and organisers of these charity projects, I basically found out that access to bikes was just one of the barriers, and young people from BAME backgrounds who wanted to cycle to school were facing many more, and more was needed to increase participation. Next slide, please. And one of the main barriers for young people in general is safety. So it might seem like a lifetime ago now, but it wasn't that long ago that we were being told by the government to stay at home and only really leave the house to shop for essentials or for our daily exercise. which meant the streets of London were practically deserted. So I've lived in London for about a year and a half now, and been coming here to visit friends and family since I was a kid. But I ended up seeing more of the city just through cycling around on the quiet streets than I did in that whole time before. Mainly because when you get on a bus or tube, you sort of have your head down, you're on your phone or you're talking to friends, and you're not really paying attention to what's going on around you. But when you're on the bike, especially when it's quiet like this, you have time to sort of look around and see the sights and all that sort of stuff. So during that 3-4 weeks, I was out all the time, and got to experience the city in a different way, really. Next slide, please. But yeah, unfortunately, it didn't really take long for traffic to return to pre-pandemic levels, as you can see here, and our roads started becoming congested and polluted once again, unfortunately. Anybody that's cycled in London knows it can be quite a scary place, especially for school kids who are going to be cycling home in the dark and in the wet weather heading into these winter months. And, you know, that can be enough for someone that doesn't have much experience to put them off. So to try and overcome these barriers, we've partnered up with Cycle Confident, who run cycle skill sessions where they can young people can build their confidence and learn how to deal with poor road infrastructure and what to do with bad drivers, really. We're also looking to run social group rides, which will raise awareness of safe cycle routes to their school, and we'll continue to lobby for better cycle infrastructure with the LCC, particularly in BAME communities, which are more likely to have high amounts of traffic passing through them. Next slide, please. Yeah, another issue is storage. So if you've ever been over to Holland, you've probably seen the big bicycle parking hubs that they've got over there. So that's the one on the right. That's at Rotterdam Central Station, and it holds around 5,000 bikes. But there's smaller versions all over the country, and there's some similar ones in London, which is on the bottom left there. But if you're from one of London's poor areas, it can be quite difficult to find anywhere safe to store your bike. And if you live in a flat or a high-rise building, you know, carrying the bikes upstairs or into lifts can be unrealistic, so you can't really keep it inside. And you could leave it unlocked. You could leave it locked, sorry, in the street outside, but unfortunately, it's only a matter of time before it's stolen, really. I had a few bikes, unfortunately, stolen, or parts of it stolen, when I was collecting them at my flat, and that was just in a 2-week period, so not really realistic again. But these bike hangers, last time I looked at the figures, there was 35,000 people waiting for one of these, so it's not really, shouldn't be down to residents to apply for these, and we need councils to put more funding into providing cycle storage solutions, particularly on estates and near schools. Next slide, please. Another issue is affordability. So one way we can overcome this really is by running our Own a Bike scheme. So basically, we're working with charities to get their young people down to our workshop at the Remaker in Brixton, where they will learn some basic bike repair skills, like fixing a flat tire or changing brakes. And then at the end of the scheme, they get to cycle away on a refurbished bike. So yeah, pretty good deal. They get a free bike, and also the skills and the know-how to look after it, which should reduce money that they need to spend on repairs and servicing. And the workshops will also be a great way to sort of build a cycling community, and so they have somewhere they can go and sort of feel part of something with like-minded people. Can I get the next slide, please? So this is slides about visibility. And when I say visibility, I don't really mean sort of lights and high-vis jackets. I'm talking about London's cycling community and how it's predominantly made up of white males from middle to high-income households. The lack of role models out on the street for young people to see sort of leads to low rates of participation, and we sort of end up in a vicious cycle, if you excuse the pun. So yeah, that's why I've got that slogan there: if you can't see it, you can't be it. But it's not just on the actual streets where we have this issue, it's the same at top level. So out of 176 riders at the start of this year's Tour de France, just one of them was black. So that was Kevin Reeser, who's pictured on the right. During the tour, he actually became a bit of a spokesman for racism and sort of spoke out about the lack of support and solidarity that he received from fellow riders and also the organisers of the tour. So hopefully next year they can do better with dealing with these issues. And then the man on the left there is Manny Arthur, who's he's basically been in the cycling scene in London for quite a while. You might have seen a video of him that went viral last year of him being stop searched by police whilst he was out with all his friends, like full Lycra gear. Quite incredible, really. And then he also had bad experiences in the past with cycling clubs and decided to form his own group called the Black Cyclist Network. So that's an inclusive group that encourages people of colour to take up cycling. They started a couple of years ago with just 6 members and they're already at 90 now. So he's a very busy man, very hard to get hold of. But I managed to bump into him a couple of months ago at a group ride, and he's sort of up for helping out next year with group social rides. So the young people have someone to look up to. Next slide, please. So yeah, what's next for Upcycle? I mean, that's how we're going to try to deal with those main issues. But apart from that, we're also going to start running the Earn a Bike project that I mentioned next week. So that's at the Remaker in Brixton. That was made possible thanks to a small grant from Peabody. So just want to say thanks to them. And we're working on securing more funding to run workshops and cycle training sessions in Hackney and Lambeth, hopefully later on this year, if not next year, and start building connections with young people, ensuring that they actually carry on cycling once they've got the bike. And then next year, we've got plans to start running pop-up workshops, which will give young people the chance to use the skills that they've learned to volunteer and run these bike repair workshops. Basically, I've got ideas of running them in LTN so we can get the community involved and start getting people together and sort of meeting each other. And then later on in the year, there's also plans to get some of the young people from the project involved in a Brixton to Brighton cycle ride. So fair or distance, they're going to have to train, they're going to have to make sure that they're staying fit, eating clean, and then they'll also be able to fundraise and for their own projects as part of it. So yeah, plenty to look forward to. And last slide, please, next one. So thanks for listening. Hopefully this is informative. If you'd like to find out more about Upcycle, you can visit our website or check us out on Insta or Twitter. And my email address is up there as well if you've got any questions or want to get in touch. Thank you very much. Back to you, Julie.
Thank you. So a really really informative and an inspirational talk there. It was really heartening to see it approaching the issue on a number of levels and bringing the community together in different ways. It was really really interesting. Right, so just to mention again, the event will be recorded, as I mentioned previously, and also if you want to ask Phil some questions about his experience there or how you might set up something similar, you should do that through the Slido web app and enter the event using the code that's in front of you on your screen. Right, so next we're going to hear from Dominique Humbert, who is a Sustainable Transport Officer at Hackney, and she's going to give us a presentation about school streets and how to avoid a car-led recovery after lockdown. Over to you, Dominique.
Thanks, Julie. And can I have my first slide, please? Thank you. So I'd like to start with the context for walking and cycling to school in Hackney. For those of you who don't know us, Hackney is an inner London borough. We currently have got 6% of pupils cycling and 60% of pupils walking to school. And for cycling, we're actually exceeding the Hackney Transport Strategy target for the journey to school. So we're not doing too badly. Additionally, in Hackney, some 70% of households do not own a car. It's worth mentioning for school streets that School Streets has been preceded by a long and sustained engagement programme, which has halved the number of pupils travelling to school by car over the last decade. And we achieved this by running travel to school programs that promote walking and cycling. A couple of examples of which you can see in the slide. We have got WOW, which we've already spoken about in the previous presentation, and also Bike Around the Borough, which is our flagship mass cycle ride when over 1,000 pupils take to the roads of Hackney. In addition to these softer measures to influence behaviour, School Streets is an example of a hard measure to lock in the change by restricting motor vehicles. Next slide, please. So a history of School Streets in Hackney. It began in 2017 with a 5-school pilot programme, which tested the school streets in a variety of road layouts, from very simple cul-de-sacs to schemes that included a section of through road, and also a combined scheme with a school street supported by a bus gate. And the essence of the Hackney School Street is that it creates a timed pedestrian and cycle zone, which is installed as an experimental traffic order. It operates for 5 days a week during term time only. And residents are exempt from the restrictions if there is no other way for them to access their address. And any vehicles that are already parked inside the school street zone when it comes into operation are able to leave at any time. And we install the large pedestrian and cycle zone signs that you can see on the slide at the entry points to the school street zone. And these are then folded up during the school holidays when the scheme is not in operation. And School Streets is enforced by ANPR camera, with fines being issued to any non-registered vehicles entering the zone. And Hackney was actually the first authority to do camera enforced school streets in England. Next slide, please. So the results of the pilot provided proof of concept. Basically, school streets worked in a variety of road layouts. It also provided evidence that the school streets met their objectives, and across the pilot schemes we saw a traffic reduction on average of 68%. The number of children cycling to school increased by 51%, and vehicle emissions outside of schools decreased by 74%. And as you can see from the testimonial on the slide, the schools were really pleased with the school streets. So we already had then a proof of concept and a well-established school streets programme. The next phase was the expansion of Hackney School Streets. Next slide, please. So we were working towards the Mayor of Hackney's manifesto commitment to deliver 17 school streets by 2021. And we were on track to achieve this 1 year early. And then in 2019, we announced that we would consider all primary schools in the borough for a school street and move forward with introducing a school street at each one unless they actively opted out. So we moved to automatic enrolment in the school streets programme. So early this year, we had installed 9 school streets with 1 out to consultation. And we had programmed to deliver 2 school streets per academic term in 2020-2021. And at the time, I thought this was a fairly ambitious target, and little did I know what was about to come next. Next slide, please. So, of course, we all know what happened next in terms of the coronavirus pandemic and the following lockdown. And I'm sure we all are aware of the impacts, both positive and negative, of the pandemic on transportation systems. As we've seen in that great video, the lockdown increased the number of people walking and cycling as people spent more time in their local area. And we all experienced cleaner air, less traffic, and quieter, more pleasant neighbourhoods. But the pandemic also poses the risk that if even a small proportion of people who used to travel by public transport switch to now using private cars, then the public health and road safety implications will be profound. And in a borough with one of the highest pedestrian casualty rates in London, the 6th highest mortality rate for deaths from pollution, but where 70% of households do not own a car, this is not acceptable and is a particularly socially unjust outcome. And for the school run in particular, a car-led recovery risks pupils and parents being squeezed together on pavements, increasing their risks of infection from the virus, as well as suffering from the effects of air pollution from the traffic gridlock that would result. Next slide, please. So one of the transport challenges faced by the London boroughs post-lockdown was the loss of budgets tied to local implementation plan funding from TfL, whose revenue from fares was obviously seriously reduced by the pandemic. So TfL subsequently announced the availability of street space funding for boroughs in order to support measures that reallocated road space away from motor traffic and to make walking and cycling safer and easier. So we prepared a funding bid and we undertook a feasibility study for all schools in the borough to ascertain where a school street would be possible. We then came up with a draft design for each of these locations, which was included in the street space bid. And you can see the locations of the 40 proposed school streets represented as yellow spots on the map in this slide. Next slide, please. So we bid for and were awarded £350,000 in June from the Street Space programme to implement 40 new school streets, with an additional £100,000 contributed by the council. And on the 7th of September, we launched the first 28 of these school streets, and we're working towards implementing the remainder by the end of the year. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? Well, it wasn't simply a case of repeating what we had done for the previous 9 school streets, particularly given the tight time frame and the scale of the rollout involved. So there were a few things that we had to approach a bit differently. Firstly, in contrast to the previous school streets, there was no public consultation period prior to the implementation of the school street. Instead, the experimental period of the experimental traffic order acts as the consultation during the first 6 months of its operation. And we're now inviting feedback during this period via an online engagement platform called Hackney Commonplace. The design and the installation of the school streets on-street measures was mostly the same, but something novel was the introduction of a school street supported by a low traffic neighbourhood filter. So at one end of the school street is a 24-hour permeable traffic filter with access for emergency vehicles only. And at the other end of the school street are the timed pedestrian cycle zone signs with access for permitted exemptions. One of the things that we amended was the operating hours of the new school streets. So we've increased them from 45 minutes to 1 hour. And this was necessary to cover the new staggered starting and closing times which schools are operating because of COVID. However, it's not possible to have bespoke timings for each school, as we want school streets to have a good level of driver recognition and understanding of the scheme at borough level. In terms of enforcement, the cost of having fixed ANPR cameras in all school streets locations is just prohibitive due to the loss of funding and the scale of the rollout. So a combination of enforcement methods will be used, including fixed and mobile camera units, and in some locations, barriers. And whereas previously we had used electronic permitting for the existing school streets, the need for a physical permit has arisen in a few areas of the borough that are outside of a controlled parking zone. Next slide, please. So whilst we have been quite busy implementing school streets, we have continued to develop resources for other authorities to help them introduce school streets in their areas. So the School Streets Toolkit was previously mentioned, and the latest resource available is School Streets design material templates, and these are blank copies of our School Streets promotional materials, which other boroughs can use and customise. Next slide, please. And I'd like to leave you with the fact that collectively, the 40 new school streets we'll be introducing will help over 14,000 children to walk and cycle to school, as well as providing space for social distancing, thereby transforming the school run and helping rebuild a greener Hackney post-lockdown. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominique. That's a really great, summary of the very active amount of school streets that have actually been implemented in Hackney. That's really really, really inspirational. Right. So our speakers have now completed their presentations, and we're going to move through to the Q&A session. As I mentioned previously, we've been receiving questions through the Slido app, and so we have got a series of questions that have been moderated by my colleague. You'll see me looking to the left, and that's just because I'm looking at a different screen. So if we just start, so a question for Dom. From Michael, sorry. I beg your pardon. Right, so a question for Dom from Michael. Sadly, there's been an onslaught of negativity against LTNs, that's low traffic neighbourhoods, and also school streets. Is there any early evidence or data that can showcase that these streets have been effective and therefore can deal with some of the negativity which has been received in terms of areas that are actually trying to implement improvements?
Yeah, we don't have the early data from the recently introduced school streets, but obviously I mentioned some of the metrics that we would record and evaluate the previous school streets by, and that includes not just the results, the mode of travel changes for the ways that parents and pupils are travelling to school, and we annually survey mode of travel at all the schools in the borough, and we've really increased that response rate to those surveys, and nearly all schools are now returning their mode of travel data. We look at sort of the physical traffic reduction in terms of counts and monitoring, and we've been able to look at the air quality monitoring in an innovative way by approaching that through a joint participation with King's College. They came up with a formula to estimate and extrapolate the air quality improvements using the traffic reduction data that we have. So in terms of monitoring, there aren't any early results, but we have those results, the proof of concept from the previous school streets as to how effective the school streets have been.
Thanks, that's great. I wonder, Steve, have you got any thoughts on that question as well?
I think if you look back at some of the earlier studies of low traffic neighbourhoods, there is a wealth of positive data on the benefits they have. King's College did a significant study, for example, on the Mini Holland scheme in Waltham Forest that showed that children's life expectancy increased by kind of an average of 6 weeks due to the interventions that have been put in place, and walking and cycling per week increased by 41 minutes for most residents. Alongside that, we're hearing a lot of negative noise at the moment about increases in car journey times, but in Waltham Forest, for example, there was no evidence of car journey time increases, and emergency response times actually fell. Emergency response times improved as a result of the interventions that have been put in place. There's an overall positive story. The other point I'd make on this one, though, is it's both about the data and it's about creating better places and shaping those stories around how people's individual lives have been improved by the schemes that have been put in place. And there are a number of positive stories we're hearing from our supporters of how people's lives have just become better because they feel more able to walk and cycle to places than they were before.
Right, that's great. Thank you very much. So moving on to the next question. This is for Phil. So why is it so important to target young people when promoting and supporting cycling?
Yep, good question. I think the main reason really is a few of them, but I think the main one would be if you can sort of target young people whilst they're at school before they start driving and start changing their habits, then that's good. If they sort of start cycling when they're 14, 15, 16, they're more likely to carry on doing it once they've left school, which means less traffic, less pollution, all those sort of good things. And then there's obviously the added health and mental health and physical benefits that come with cycling in outdoors, especially with friends. So through the group social rides, we can get everyone together and get everyone participating in the sport together. And then there's also, the reason why I targeted young people from ethnic minority groups is because they are underrepresented, and coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, they don't really have many opportunities for an outlet or something to focus on. So with these workshops, they'll be coming in hopefully every week and learning new skills, meeting new people. So I think, yeah, that's the main ones really.
Great, thank you very much. I'm just going to ask a question now from Clara Murray for East London Lions, and she says, has there been any resistance from parents to the introduction of school streets? And if so, what have been their main concerns? Right, initially that's for you, Dom.
Thank you. Yeah, there are always concerns raised by parents, and I think the message for all the school streets is that school streets are not banning anyone from driving to school. You can still continue to drive to school. It's just that you will need to park a bit further away and complete the remainder of your journey on foot. So it's not car free. It's not a banning of driving to school, and obviously within that we can work with special cases for exemptions for blue badge holders and parents or pupils with any mobility difficulties. So I think that there will always be individual cases, and it's just about having the right messages about the school street, that it's not a ban on driving to school. Parents are still able to drive to school, and we appreciate that some will still continue to do so, basically. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next question is from Nathan Howard at Argent, and a similar question to Michael's question. How have School Streets programme been received by motorists, and what's been done to mitigate their concerns? And we'll start with you, Steve, on that one.
So I think it's important to start by saying that there's majority support for School Streets in the polling that we've produced, and in the polling that others have produced. The majority of people do support School Streets. I think the answer, unfortunately, is very similar to Dominique's answer, that there's always going to be negative voices in against some of these schemes, a minority of negative voices in the case of School Streets. But as Dominique was saying, this is not about stopping people from driving altogether, although of course we do want to see far less cars on the school run. This is about creating a safe space outside the school for social distancing, free of air pollution, kind of free of some of the damaging kind of other impacts of kind of cars there, and having that safe space. People will always feel that they're inconvenienced by not being able to drive down a road for 2 minutes and have 5 minutes added to their journey, but you need to look at those wider benefits that accrue from school streets, which are massively significant.
Thank you very much. So Phil, here's a question for you. So how would you like councils to see councils improve their engagement with the BAME communities? Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, so far, Lambeth Council, which neighbours me in Wandsworth, but my storage is based in Brixton, they've been really great in supporting sort of with resources, the Cycle Confident guys who work across all boroughs, I think, but they've been involved, like sending mechanics down and instructors, so that kind of thing. But yeah, hopefully, I mean, I'm at the stage now where I've funded everything myself. Hopefully the councils can start giving me some money to keep running it, basically. That's the hope.
Thank you. Next question is for Dominique. Where were the 24/7 modal filters at the end of the newer school streets? How were the 24/7 modal filters received at the end of the school streets by residents and local motorists?
Well, it's a good question, but I'm afraid I can't answer because it has yet to be installed. So it's a case of watch this space. It's coming in the next few weeks. Okay,
thank you. Next question. Have you considered making school streets permanent? Is that possible to make certain school streets so that they turn into public spaces, parks, etc.? And this is a question again for Dom.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we do make them permanent. They are on a rolling basis. They're introduced with the experimental traffic order, and then as that comes towards its expiry date, we make them permanent. So we review them, look at the evidence, look at all of the comments received, do additional site visits, and fully evaluate what the options are for that particular school street before we make it permanent. To date, it hasn't included any sort of hard engineering measures, such as some of the ones you suggested, but that's not to say it won't be considered in the future, basically. But we do make them permanent on a rolling basis.
That's great. Thank you very much. And next question is for Steve. Is it a plan to have new schools being constructed having automatic enrolment into a school street scheme?
I don't know the answer to that personally, but of course we would support schools thinking actively at construction, local authorities thinking at construction stage actively about travel to and from the school and ensuring it can be as sustainable as possible. It's vital looking forward that our schools, our bus stops, our retail facilities are all linked into good walking and cycling networks, and bolting this on afterwards is not as good as thinking of it kind of right at the start of the process. So in a theoretical world, yes, we'd be very supportive of that.
Thank you. Right, and I'm going to make, given the time, I'm going to make this the final question. So this is from Lorna Stevenson, Active Travel Academy. She says that some schools refuse to take bikes or scooters, citing limited storage space and the risks of COVID transmission. Is there any statutory guidance or guidance that the panel could offer in terms of combating this? We'll start with Steve and then we'll go to Dom.
The statutory guidance from Department for Transport and Department for Education have both produced guidance on the return to school, and that guidance is very clear that the preference should be for walking and cycling to school. And of course, if you've got cycles or scooters, you need somewhere to store them within the school site. I understand some of the challenges that schools may be seeing with social distancing in bike sheds, but I've certainly seen examples of schools both in London and outside of London in recent weeks that have taken that challenge on successfully and looked carefully at how they can get bubbles in the bike sheds at different times, just to ensure that children can cycle and scoot to school still.
Do you have anything to add, Dominique? Or?
Yeah, I was just going to say, on a practical level, it is a constraint for schools having enough space for parking cycles and scooters. One of the things that we offer through Hackney is a small grant scheme to schools to enable them to install cycle parking solutions to try and overcome that.
Okay, thank you. So that really brings together our conference, and I'd really like to thank all the speakers for their really engaging and inspiring presentations. I think beginning that sharing our experiences and inspiring us in ways to meet the challenge of travelling to school, particularly now when it's more difficult than ever. And these conferences, for me, are the things that you go away feeling enlightened and inspired. So that is the end of our conference today. I just wanted to remind you that this is part of a webinar session and we'll be having further events coming up. There's an event planned for the end of November, and if you keep an eye on your social media and the Eventbrite page, you will be able to see what that event's going to be, and also log on in the same way that we have here. I'd like to thank you all for joining us at this conference today, and look forward to seeing you all at the next event at the end of November. Thank you very much.